In the quiet Minneapolis suburbs of 1994, life was a picture of perfect American safety. Manicured lawns, freshly painted mailboxes, and streets filled with the laughter of children playing until the streetlights flickered on. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and trust was the unspoken currency of the community. Every evening, like clockwork, a familiar melody would drift through the warm summer air, the soft tinkling chime of the ice cream truck. For the kids on the block, this was the signal. Bikes were dropped, games were abandoned, and a frantic sprint to the curb began, with sweaty palms clutching carefully saved quarters. The truck itself was a classic, an old but well-kept vehicle, painted in cheerful shades of white and blue, with cartoon ice cream cones adorning its sides. At the wheel was a man everyone simply called Mr. Ray. He was a tall, polite figure, almost always seen in a crisp white cap and sunglasses, even as dusk settled over the neighborhood. His voice was soft, almost shy, and he possessed a remarkable patience. Never rushing the children as they deliberated over their sweet treats, parents appreciated him. They saw him as a decent man doing honest work, a comforting and reliable presence. He often handed out free popsicles to kids who were a little short on change, a small act of kindness that further cemented his place in the heart of the community. No one, not for a single moment, ever thought to question the man in the white truck. That summer, a boy named Eli Parker celebrated his 10th birthday. Eli was a quiet, observant child, the kind who would spend his afternoons creating intricate chalk maps on the sidewalk, lost in his own world of imagination. But there was one sound that could always pull him from his reverie: the bell of the ice cream truck. He adored it. Each evening, without fail, he would wait at the corner, his heart thumping in anticipation, ready to order his usual blue rocket pop. The predictable routine was a small, comforting ritual in his young life. Neighbors can still recall the last day they saw him. It was a Friday evening in late August, the kind of day where the heat lingers long after the sun begins to dip below the horizon. The air was thick with the droning buzz of cicadas, and somewhere in the distance, the faint, familiar jingle of the ice cream truck began its slow journey down the street. Eli's mother remembers him running towards the door just before dinner was ready. "I'll be right back," he called out to her, his voice filled with excitement. "Mr. Ray's here." He dashed outside, a small figure disappearing into the golden light of the setting sun. But he never came back. As the minutes ticked by, a subtle unease began to settle over the Parker household. 6:30 came and went, then 7. The sun had completely set, and the streetlights had cast their pale yellow glow over the empty sidewalks. By 8:30 p.m., the ice cream truck's music had long since faded, and the vehicle had vanished from the neighborhood. By 9 p.m., a sense of dread had turned into full-blown panic. The police were at the Parkers' front door, their serious expressions a stark contrast to the once peaceful evening. Soon the quiet suburban streets were filled with the urgent murmur of search parties. Flashlights cut sharp beams through darkened backyards, sweeping across manicured lawns and into the shadowed spaces of cul-de-sacs. Neighbors, friends, and strangers joined the desperate hunt, calling out Eli's name into the night. Then they found it. Eli's bike was lying on its side near the curb, right where he always waited. The kickstand was down, and one of the wheels was still spinning, a slow, lazy rotation that spoke of a recent, abrupt departure. There were no signs of a struggle, no scuff marks on the pavement, no dropped coins, no discarded wrapper. There were no footprints other than the ones now being left by the searchers. There was nothing. Just the bike, the oppressive quiet of the night, and the ghost of a sound-an echo of that same ice cream jingle, playing faintly in the memory of everyone who had heard it just hours before. The familiar, happy tune now seemed sinister, a haunting melody that marked the exact moment a 10-year-old boy vanished without a trace. The investigation began immediately and with intense focus. The police honed in on the one person who was known to be there, Mr. Ray, the ice cream man. But when they started digging, they discovered something unsettling. Mr. Ray didn't seem to exist. The name was an alias. The man's real name was Raymond Fuller, and his background was far from the simple, wholesome image he projected. He had a criminal record in another state, for offenses that sent a chill down the spine of every parent in the neighborhood. But finding him proved to be an impossible task. The ice cream truck, which belonged to a small, independent company, had been reported stolen just a week before Eli's disappearance. Fuller had simply driven it into Minneapolis, created a new identity, and seamlessly blended into the fabric of the community. He had used their trust as his camouflage. The search for Eli Parker became one of the largest in the state's history. Volunteers canvassed every park, every wooded area, every abandoned building for miles. His face was on flyers taped to every telephone pole and in every storefront window. The local news ran his story every night, the smiling school picture of a boy with bright, curious eyes, becoming a heartbreakingly familiar image. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The leads grew cold. The initial frenzy of the search slowly faded, replaced by a dull, persistent ache in the heart of the community. The ice cream truck was eventually found abandoned in a parking lot 2 states away. It had been wiped clean. There was no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no stray hairs, nothing to link Raymond Fuller or anyone else to the vehicle, and nothing to suggest what had happened to Eli. The disappearance shattered the idyllic illusion of the Minneapolis suburb. Suddenly, the unlocked doors were bolted shut. Children were no longer allowed to play outside unsupervised. The sound of any ice cream truck for years to come would not bring joy, but a wave of anxiety and sadness. The community had been violated, its sense of security stolen along with one of its children. Parker family was left in a state of unending limbo, caught between a sliver of hope and the crushing weight of despair. Every ringing phone, every knock at the door, carried the potential for news, but it never came. Years passed. The case grew cold, relegated to a dusty file cabinet in the police department. New families moved into the neighborhood unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded on their quiet street. The story of Eli Parker became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered from one generation of parents to the next. But for those who were there, for the kids who lined up for ice cream with Eli, the memory remained vivid. They remembered his quiet smile, his love for Blue Rocket Pops, and the chilling finality of that warm August evening. Raymond Fuller was never found. He vanished as completely as Eli did, a ghost who had briefly materialized in their lives only to leave behind a permanent scar. The mystery of what happened to Eli Parker remains unsolved to this day. It serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are not the ones we fear in the dark, but the ones that hide in plain sight. Smiling from behind the window of a cheerful white and blue truck, offering sweet treats on a perfect summer day, the sound of that jingle may have faded from the streets of that Minneapolis suburb, but for many, it never truly went away. It echoes in their memory, a symbol of lost innocence and a question that will likely never be answered. The police canvassed the neighborhood long into the night. Front porches lit up, one after another, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Screen doors creaked open, and parents whispered the same haunting words to each other, their voices trembling under their breath. He was just here. He was just getting ice cream. Almost everyone had seen the truck that evening. It's the same white and blue van. It was a familiar sight, a staple of the humid August air. Its soft chimes drifted lazily through the streets, a siren song for every kid on the block. The driver, in his spotless white cap, offered friendly waves and frozen treats. It was nothing unusual, nothing alarming. It was just another perfect summer night in a town where nothing bad ever happened. But as the officers began asking for a description of the driver, a strange and unsettling picture started to form, or rather several different pictures. Mrs. Langley, who lived on the corner, swore he had brown hair. Longer than normal, she insisted. But old Mr. Benson, who was sitting on his porch swing just 2 doors down, described the man as having short blonde hair and a prominent mustache. 2 kids, who had pooled their money for a single ice cream cone, were adamant that he had no mustache at all. One mother claimed he wore glasses, another said he absolutely didn't, and every single one of them had been standing on the same street, at the same time, looking at the same man, Detective Mark Ridley, a man who had seen the worst of humanity in his decade handling missing child cases. Felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He jotted a quick note in his worn-out book, "Identity, inconsistent, possible disguise?" It seemed unlikely. Disguises weren't common in quiet, trusting places like this, and this was 1994. Back then, most people just assumed that anyone selling ice cream to children out of a truck had passed some kind of background check. Most people, as it turned out, were terribly wrong. The next morning brought a new level of urgency and a deeper sense of dread. The police contacted the city's licensing office to identify the owner of the ice cream van. The phone rang and rang again. It felt like an eternity before a voice finally came on the line. When they reached a clerk, she repeated the same sentence 3 times. Her voice laced with a confusion that mirrored Ridley's own growing fear. "We don't have an ice cream license registered to that neighborhood," she said, as if she couldn't believe her own records. "We don't have any vendor listed as Mr. Ray, and we absolutely do not have a white and blue truck on file." Detective Ridley's pen froze over the page. An unregistered phantom truck, driven by a man with no consistent face. The case was turning from a simple missing persons report into a full-blown nightmare. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the quiet streets, but a cold chill had settled over the town. At 2:14 p.m., a patrol officer made a discovery that changed everything. While re-examining the scene where the child Eli was last seen, they found his small red bicycle still lying on its side in the grass. But something new was there, something that hadn't been there the night before. Taped carefully to the side of Eli's bike was a Polaroid photo. The image was grainy, slightly out of focus, but the subject was unmistakable. It showed the back of the ice cream truck, driving away down a tree-lined road at dusk. Even in the poor light, specific details stood out. Paint was chipped at the corner of the rear door. Small circular dent marked the bumper, and a hand-painted phrase in fading blue letters read, "Sweet Ray's Treats." This was their first real lead. Ridley grabbed his radio, his voice sharp and clear. "Put an alert out for all unregistered ice cream vehicles within a 50-mile radius. I want every abandoned warehouse, every back road, every long-term parking lot checked. The vehicle is a white and blue van with Sweet Ray's Treats painted on the back." As the official search widened, the neighborhood's collective memory began to stir. With the illusion of safety now shattered, people started remembering small, uncomfortable details they had previously dismissed. The truck, they recalled, only ever came at dusk, never during the bright, safe hours of the day. It never stopped at the same spot twice, always moving, always unpredictable. And perhaps most unnervingly, no one had ever seen where it went after it left the neighborhood. It would turn a corner, its chimes fading into the distance, and simply vanish. Then, one of the kids who had spoken to the police earlier remembered something else. Something that seemed trivial at first, but made the hairs on Ridley's arms stand on end. "He didn't always play the same song," the boy said, his voice small. "Sometimes the music sounded slower." Ridley circled that line twice in his notebook. Slower. Why would the music be slower? That evening, as twilight once again settled over the anxious town, the phone at the station rang. It was a woman who lived 3 blocks away from Eli's home. She said she was looking at old photo albums and saw something that made her heart stop. She recognized the van from the news report, not from this summer, but from 1991, 3 years ago. Back then, another boy, a classmate of her own son, had disappeared from a local playground. He had told his friends the exact same thing Eli had said before he vanished. "I am gone. Nah. Go get a rocket pop." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. Ridley and his team dove into the cold case files and they found it. A year before that, in 1990, a young girl had gone missing just 20 minutes after an ice cream truck was seen near her elementary school. In each case, the details were maddeningly vague. Witnesses gave conflicting descriptions of the driver. The truck was there one moment and gone the next. No one ever linked the cases. No one ever thought to. Because who would ever assume an ice cream truck, the very symbol of childhood joy and summer freedom, could be a vessel for such darkness? The last note Detective Ridley wrote that night was simple, but it chilled him to the bone. "The truck didn't arrive this summer," he wrote. It returned, "This wasn't a new predator. This was an old one, a ghost who had haunted these streets before and had come back for another season." And somewhere on the east side of town, just past the old rusted railroad tracks, a neighbor who was letting her dog out for the night paused. She swore she heard a familiar chime echoing faintly through the still evening air, soft, slow, and drifting away into the dark, silent trees. The next morning, Detective Ridley started with what should have been a simple task: making a list of every ice cream supplier, distributor, and vendor operating in Minnesota back in the early 1990s. He expected a few names, maybe a dozen. He wasn't expecting zero. The woman at the licensing office checked her records again. Then again, she even printed out every single permit issued from 1987 to 1994. The result was the same. There were no records for a man named Ray. No white and blue van. No mobile vendor routes registered for that suburb at all. It wasn't that the van was unregistered according to the system. It had never existed. Puzzled, Ridley drove back to Eli's neighborhood. He started knocking on doors again, but this time he changed his question. Instead of asking what people remembered, he asked what they did. The responses were bizarre. A man living on Pine Court leaned against his doorframe and said something strange. Funny thing, I remember the music clear as day, but I don't quite remember seeing the truck leave. A woman 2 blocks down, watering her wilting petunias, added, he always drove so slow. It felt like he wasn't going somewhere, but circling something. A teenager, who'd been a kid back then, chimed in. Sometimes I felt like the music was playing even when the truck wasn't there. Ridley wrote everything down in his small, worn notebook. As the pages filled, the notes began to form a pattern, a very strange one. The truck only came at dusk, always, and only when the sun had just dipped behind the houses, casting long shadows across the lawns. It was as if the driver didn't want the full daylight on him. 3:40 that afternoon, Ridley's day took another sharp turn. A patrol officer walked up to his desk, holding something that looked like a relic, an old VHS tape from the elementary school across town. The label on it was dated May 1991, the exact same day a boy, named Aiden Morris, had vanished without a trace after recess. The school custodian, a man who saved things out of sheer habit, had kept the tape. He said he'd never actually watched it. They found an old VCR in the evidence room and played it. The first images were shaky, handheld footage of kids running around the playground. Aiden was easy to spot, a bright red shirt, striped shorts, laughing as he climbed the jungle gym. Then, at the very edge of the frame, gliding between the trees, a white and blue shape rolled slowly into view. It was the van. The same cartoon decals, the same faded blue paint. And underneath the happy shouts of children, the same musical chime, faint but unmistakable. Ridley leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. His pulse jumped. But just as the van reached the center of the frame, the tape glitched. A thick line of static cut through the image. Then, the screen went completely black for 6 full seconds. When the picture came back, the playground was still there. The kids were still playing, but the van was gone. It's not driving away, not turning a corner, just gone. It was as if it had been perfectly cut out of the frame. Ridley rewound the tape, played it forward, tried freeze framing, then slow motion. Every time the outcome was identical, the truck appeared, then it just didn't exist anymore. Immediately called the custodian and asked him about the glitch. The old man cleared his throat, his voice low. That's not the only tape like that, he said. The van would show up on camera then. The recording skips. It happened in 1992. Every time. A cold feeling tightened in Ridley's chest. It wasn't fear, it was a chilling sense of recognition. Whatever Mr. Ray was, he had been a part of this neighborhood, a shadow in its history for far longer than anyone wanted to believe. At 7 p.m. that same evening, as dusk settled over the town, the phone rang. A boy 3 blocks over from Eli's house had reported something new. He said he could hear the ice cream music. It was soft, slow, like it was being played from very far away. But it was the final detail, the part that made Ridley drop his pen, that sent a shockwave through the station. Wasn't coming from the street, the boy whispered into the phone. House. It was coming from between the houses, like it was moving on foot. That night, every officer in town was sent out on foot patrol. They checked the alleys, the dark cul-de-sacs, the sprawling parks. They found nothing. No truck, no music. Just the lingering phantom smell of engine oil hanging in the humid air, as if something had passed by only moments earlier. Ridley closed his notebook at midnight, stood at his window, staring out at the quiet houses, the dark windows, the empty sidewalks. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. The ice cream truck wasn't running a route. It was choosing moments. It was hunting. Detective Ridley spent the next morning doing something simple on paper. But the result was far from simple. He drew a map of the neighborhood. Then he marked every single spot where residents said they had seen the phantom ice cream truck. Pine Court, Willow Drive, Elm Street, the playground, the cul-de-sac by the railroad tracks, and finally the intersection where Eli's bike had been found. Each point on its own seemed completely normal. A typical route for a neighborhood vendor. But when Ridley connected them in the order the truck supposedly traveled, his pen didn't make a simple loop or a straight line. It didn't form a route. It formed a spiral, perfect inward spiral, moving slowly, methodically, toward the very center of the neighborhood. Ridley stared at the lines, a sense of unease creeping over him.
This isn't a delivery route, he whispered to the empty room. This is tracking something. His instincts told him to dig deeper, to look into the past. He pulled up the city archives, searching for old maps from the late 80s to the mid-90s. And that's when things went from strange to downright bizarre.
The center of the spiral, the place this imaginary route ended, wasn't a street anymore. It was an empty lot. Overgrown with grass, it was just a patch of forgotten land surrounded by trees. A dead end. But on the oldest maps, from 1987, that lot wasn't empty. The faint lines on the aged paper showed a small house. A house that no longer existed. A house that hadn't been destroyed in any reported accident or fire. A house that was simply erased. Ridley's mind raced. He checked the demolition permits for that address. There were none. He checked the property records. Completely blank. It was as if the house and whoever lived there had vanished long before Eli did. He decided to talk to the people who would remember the longest living neighbors. And they all said the same unsettling thing. There was a family there. I don't remember their names. It was a collective amnesia, a shared blind spot in the community's memory. One elderly woman added something that sent a shiver down Ridley's spine. I remember that ice cream truck, she said, her voice distant. It used to stop near that house too. It's back in the early 90s. Before the house. Well, before it wasn't there anymore. A cold, heavy feeling sank in Ridley's stomach. This wasn't just a missing person case. This was something older, something woven into the fabric of the neighborhood itself. He took 2 officers and went to the empty lot at dusk. The sun was falling, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick with that late summer Minnesota humidity, and the buzzing of cicadas was deafening. Grass reached up to their knees as they waded into the forgotten space. In the middle of the lot, Ridley noticed something glinting, half buried in the dirt. He knelt down, brushing the soil away with his hand. It was a piece of metal, rusted and caked with earth. A license plate, white background, blue lettering. The letters were barely readable, but they were still there. SWTARY. Ridley's throat tightened. Sweet Ray, the same hand-painted words once seen on the back of the van. As he held the plate up, a soft sound drifted across the empty lot. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, just a faint, slow melody floating between the trees. The ice cream chime. The same one from every single report. Ridley spun around, flashlight raised, heart pounding in his chest. But there was no truck, no headlights piercing the twilight, no engine rumble. Just the empty street and the long shadows of telephone poles stretching like skeletal fingers. One of the officers whispered, his voice trembling, "Sir, I thought that house was torn down years ago." Ridley didn't answer. He couldn't, because at that moment he realized something truly chilling. Every sighting of the ice cream truck had pulled the spiral tighter. The route wasn't random. It was a countdown, a slow constriction. And Eli Parker was last seen standing on that same corner, at the perfect, inescapable center of it all. The truck hadn't been searching for just anyone. It had been coming for him. The morning after finding that rusted, half-buried license plate, Detective Ridley knew the spiral wasn't just a random pattern. It was a map. He ordered a full-grid search, starting from the very center of that drawn-out swirl, that empty lot where a house once stood. A house that no one in the neighborhood seemed to remember clearly. Officers fanned out, their boots sinking into the overgrown grass. They combed through the debris of a forgotten life. Old concrete slabs from a collapsed porch, bits of foundation still hiding under the soil, the faint outline of a flower bed long since reclaimed by weeds. The untrained eye, nothing looked out of place. It was just an abandoned lot, a scar on an otherwise perfect suburban street. But as Ridley walked the perimeter, his gaze tracing the edges where the wild grass met the dense line of trees, he saw it. Something subtle, something he would have missed if he wasn't looking for the impossible. The grass closest to the trees was pressed down, not trampled, not messy. It was pushed down in two narrow, perfectly parallel lines. It looked as if something heavy, something on wheels had passed through here and recently. But this wasn't a street. It wasn't even a path, just dirt and weeds and years of neglect. Still, the lines were there. They curved gently, leading away from the lot, heading for the shadows, and disappearing behind a thick row of pine trees. Ridley motioned for his team to continue the search of the lot, but he followed the tracks alone. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he were walking deeper into the same hypnotic pattern the spiral had been drawing all along. The tracks led him into a narrow, wooded cut-through behind the neighborhood. It was a place adults rarely went, a forgotten ribbon of wilderness between manicured lawns. But Ridley knew that for every kid growing up here in the 90s, this place was a second home. He could almost see the ghosts of their childhoods. The remnants of old forts made from fallen branches, a frayed rope from a tree swing dangling over a dried-up creek bed. It was a maze of memories, and then he heard it. A faint noise, barely more than a whisper, carried on the wind. Ding, ding, ding. It's the unmistakable chime of an ice cream truck. But this was different. It wasn't the tinny electronic jingle that blasted from a speaker. This sounded real. It sounded like a small manual bell being rung slowly, deliberately, from somewhere much deeper in the woods. Ridley froze, his hand instinctively going to the radio on his shoulder. The sound was wrong. It was out of place, out of time. Felt like an echo from decades ago. "Units, move toward my location," he whispered into his radio, his voice tight, slow, and quiet. The bell rang again. Ding. Ding. A lonely, patient sound. When the officers arrived, their faces etched with confusion, Ridley split them into three groups. They began to sweep the woods in a wide triangle formation, pushing deeper into the trees. For a while, they found nothing but the detritus of the wood's broken branches, last year's dead leaves. Then, one officer called out, "At!" He'd found a few candy wrappers, their colors faded, half sunk in the mud. And next to them, a small, warped piece of cardboard. The paint was peeling, but you could still make out the faded blue letters, Sweet Ray S50 Pops. It looked ancient, like it had been lying there for years, maybe even decades. The trail of small discoveries finally opened into a clearing. Like a forgotten tombstone, stood an old, weathered concrete pad. It was cracked down the middle, a jagged line splitting it in two. Moss grew in the crevices, and the whole thing was half sunk into the earth, as if the forest was slowly trying to swallow it whole. Ridley recognized it instantly. This was it. The driveway of the erased house. The forest had grown up and around it, swallowing everything except this thick, stubborn slab of concrete. On the far side of the pad, pressed into the soft dirt, they found something else. Two deep impressions. Clean, clear, and a perfect tire width apart. It was as if a vehicle had been parked there, and parked there recently. Well, but there were no tracks leading in, and no tracks leading out. The forest floor around the pad was untouched, covered in a delicate layer of leaves and twigs. It was impossible. The vehicle had been here, and then it had vanished. Ridley crouched down, running his fingers across the smooth, compacted dirt of the marks. They were fresh. "Sir," one of the officers said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "The neighbors. They said that house was torn down in '91. Ridley nodded, his eyes still fixed on the tire marks. "But the clerk at the county office said she doesn't remember any demolition records," he replied, thinking out loud. "And the official maps say the last permit issued for this property was in 1989. The timeline made no sense." It was a knot of contradictions. Just then, one of the rookie officers stepped forward, holding a small plastic object gingerly between his thumb and forefinger. "Found this near the tree line, Detective." Ridley took it. He turned it over in his hand. was a rocket pop wrapper, crumpled, the red, white, and blue colors faded by sun and rain. But at the bottom, printed in tiny black letters, was the expiration date. August 1994, the exact month Eli disappeared. Ridley's breath caught in his throat. It felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. He felt a dozen connections snapping into place at once, forming a terrifying picture. Before he could speak, a voice crackled through his radio, urgent and strained. "Detective, we've been digging through the archives again. Something's off with that van." Ridley pressed the radio to his ear. "What is it? The license plate you found? Shows up in incident reports starting in 1988, but it's never in the same place twice. It's always spotted in neighborhoods near schools or parks. Always around dusk. And detective, it's always right before a missing child case is reported in that area." The chill of the woods seemed to wrap itself around. "Ridley? Colder than the evening air? And the driver?" he asked, his voice low. There was a long pause on the other end. "We tried running the name Ray, Sweet Ray's. There's no Ray connected to any official food vendor route in this state. It's not now, not ever." Another pause, this one heavier, but there is something else. "What?" Ridley demanded. "We found a death certificate." Ridley straightened up, his whole body tense. He stared at the empty concrete pad, the ghost of a driveway. A death certificate for who? Another silence stretched across the radio waves, then the voice came back, quiet and unnerved, for a man named Raymond Hale. He died in 1987. 1987, a year before the first sighting, 7 years before Eli vanished. Ridley's mind reeled. He looked at the impossible tire marks. He looked at the candy wrapper in his hand, with its 1994 expiration date. He heard the faint phantom echo of that bell ringing through the trees. The ice cream truck. The man in white. The name every child and every report said so casually.
"Mr. Ray."
Mr. Ray died years before anyone ever saw his truck. Ridley whispered the question to the empty woods, to the ghosts of the past that surrounded him. Then who has been driving the truck? The woods fell completely silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves. There was only the memory of a bell, ringing slow and uneven, somewhere just past the tree line, as if someone or something was still walking the last route he used to drive. The search wasn't for a man anymore. It was for a ghost. The next evening, just as the sun dipped behind the treetops and the sky turned that deep orange-purple Minnesota color, Detective Ridley returned alone to the woods behind the neighborhood. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. He needed to be here, away from the sterile environment of the precinct, away from the sympathetic but ultimately useless glances of his colleagues. This case was different. It felt personal, weaving its way into the quiet corners of his mind, keeping him up at night with its impossible threads. He retraced the spiral map once more, the crude drawing from the old case file feeling strangely alive in his hand. Each step was deliberate, his boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves and twigs. He was listening, waiting for something, anything, to break the unnatural silence. The woods felt wrong. Not just quiet, but held in a state of suspended breath. He'd been a cop for 20 years, spent half his life in places people shouldn't be, but this was a new kind of dread. It was a cold, patient feeling, like something ancient was watching him from just beyond his line of sight. Finally, he reached the clearing. It was exactly as he'd left it. The cracked concrete pad, a stark gray square amidst the wild green, looked like a forgotten altar. The tire marks, impossibly deep, were still etched into the dirt, defying the recent rains. And the trees. The trees stood like silent, towering sentinels, their leaves perfectly still. Not a single leaf moved, not a whisper of wind stirred the branches. It was as if the air itself had solidified. Ridley stood there for what felt like an eternity, but his watch told him it was almost an hour. He let the weight of it all press down on him. The unanswered questions were a physical burden, making his shoulders ache. 3 missing kids from the early 90s, their faces now ghostly images in faded case files. Another boy vanished without a trace years later. And now Eli, little Eli, with his bright red bike and a smile that could light up a room. All of them connected by a phantom ice cream truck that shouldn't exist, and a man who, by all logical accounts, could not exist. The timeline made no sense. The descriptions were too vague, too folkloric. It was a ghost story masquerading as a police investigation. He let out a long, frustrated sigh, the sound swallowed immediately by the oppressive quiet. It was useless. It was chasing shadows. Turning back toward the path that led to the neighborhood, he felt a familiar pang of defeat. And that's precisely when he heard it. Ding, ding, ding. It wasn't an engine. It wasn't music. It was the clear, distinct sound of a handbell. The ringing was slow, uneven, almost lazy, as if the person ringing it was tired. Ridley froze, every muscle in his body tensing. Do, 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 do. The sound was coming from deeper in the woods, off the path he'd been following. His training kicked in, pushing the fear down, replacing it with a cold, focused readiness. The bell grew louder, closer. It was moving, weaving between the trees, a phantom sound in a silent forest. He gripped the heavy flashlight in his hand, his thumb hovering over the switch. His heart was pounding, a frantic drum against his ribs, but his hand was steady. He stepped off the path, moving toward the sound. The branches of the undergrowth cracked softly under his boots, the noise feeling like a gunshot in the stillness. Ding ding. The bell rang again, so close now, it seemed to be just beyond the next thicket of trees. He pushed through a final curtain of leaves and branches, his breath catching in his chest. And there it was. But it wasn't the truck. It wasn't a man. It was just a small object hanging from a low branch, swaying gently back and forth. A breeze that hadn't existed a moment before had sprung up from nowhere, nudging the object, making it chime. It was a handbell, old coated in rust that bled through chipped and faded blue paint. The exact kind of cheap tinny bell that used to hang from the rearview mirror of a 90s ice cream truck. The kind kids would run towards, Pavlovian in their desperate need for frozen sugar. Ridley approached it slowly, his flashlight beam cutting a sharp cone through the gathering dusk. The bell was real, solid. He could smell the rust, see the way the paint had bubbled and peeled over decades. And as he got closer, he saw something else. Beneath the bell, snagged on a broken twig just below it, was a small, square piece of glossy paper. He knelt, his knees protesting. He picked it up carefully, his fingers surprisingly gentle. It was a Polaroid. The edges were dirty, the corners softened and worn by rain and time. But the image itself was horribly, unmistakably clear. It showed a white and blue ice cream truck, parked right here on this concrete pad, in this exact clearing where Ridley now stood. The angle was low, as if taken by a child. And near the back bumper, almost out of the frame, was a kid's bike. It was red, the frame, a small peeling sticker of a cartoon rocket. He saw the same distinct scratch on the handlebars he denoted from the pictures of Eli's bike. It was Eli's bike.
Oh.
There was no doubt. Ridley's voice caught in his throat, a dry, rasping sound. He looked at the bottom of the Polaroid. The built-in printer had stamped the date in that classic, slightly fuzzy font, Aug. 26, 1994, 6:49 p.m., 1994. 8. The exact date and minute that Eli, in the present day, had gone missing. The impossible timeline snapped into a terrifying, nonsensical focus. He felt a wave of vertigo, as if the ground beneath him had dropped away. With trembling hands, he turned the photo over. On the back, written in a shaky, spidery script with faded blue ink, were 6 words. He asked for a rocket pop. Ridley looked up sharply, his head snapping toward the surrounding trees, his flashlight beams slicing frantically through the darkness. But the woods were empty. The breeze was gone. The world was utterly silent and still once more. The bell on the branch had stopped swinging, hanging limp and lifeless. The only sound was the frantic pounding of his own blood in his ears. As he walked back to the neighborhood, the photo clutched in his hand, the world seemed to shift around him. The cicadas, which had been buzzing moments before, fell quiet as he passed. One by one, the streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and writhe at the edge of his vision. And far, far in the distance, so faint, he almost convinced himself he was imagining it, that his mind was finally cracking under the strain he heard it. The tinny, cheerful chime of an ice cream truck's tune, drifting across the dark, empty fields. It was slow, uneven, like a half-forgotten memory that stubbornly refused to fade. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next part of the investigation. See you next time.